Bomb explosion.
I haven't done that, but I'll tell you one thing. The bomb explosion sends out a signal that's brief and spreads out. The radio waves supposedly don't spread very much. They're beamed out, you know. So, look, I think radio will not be what is used for long-distance communication. We can't figure out anything better than something that was in use 120, 113 years ago. We're slipping badly. I don't see any hands. Boy, I got off.
I know.
I've got a question. I can't remember the name of the book, but a recent book came out with a new theory about these Roswell bodies having been Russian cosmonauts. I think they hired midgets or something to.
There are a number. The question is, how about this new theory that they were really, the bodies at Roswell were Russian created by Dr. Death, actually. Menzel, or however you pronounce it.
Menzel.
Yeah. Annie Jacobson, in her book about Area 51, figured out that they were trying to do what was done by War of the Worlds in 1938, which created tremendous panic. They wanted to panic the United States, so Stalin worked with Menzel. This is her theory. I am not endorsing this. To create badly off bodies, if you will, very defective bodies, and somehow flow them to New Mexico and crash them there so we would panic. That's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard, for several reasons. First of all, War of the Worlds took place in New Jersey, my home state. And in one of the most heavily, densely populated parts of the United States. And it was treated as a news broadcast. We got our news from the radio. And it was made to sound like a news broadcast. The Martians have landed, they're destroying buildings and people. You had every darn right to panic. What do you get? Space travel? What is this nonsense? You know, it was before we put anything up. So, of course, you had a right to panic. The crash site in New Mexico has nobody living there. I mean, if you want a lot of nothing, boy, you drive around New Mexico and there is a lot of nothing out there. Well, just to illustrate that, I had an English journalist call me. I don't understand why you don't just drive your car up to the crash site, park along the road, go in with a metal detector, and find wreckage. And I said, have you ever been to New Mexico? Well, no. I said, well, there are several problems. In the first place, there is no road. What do you mean there is no road? Of course there's a road. It's out in the middle of nowhere. You got to go cross country. In the second place, I happened to look a day or two before. England and Wales combined at that time had about 40 million people. New Mexico had under 1 million people and was 3 times the size of England and Wales. They're not the same. There's a lot of nothing in New Mexico. And that's the kind of nonsense you get. So this notion of Annie Jacobson, she got just about everything wrong. She was violently anti-nuclear for some reason or other. Didn't understand that a nuclear rocket engine would be used not as a launch vehicle, but as an upper stage vehicle and stuff like that, you know. So it's one of a humongous number of idiotic suggestions for what happened at Roswell.
Thank you.
Also, we know that there was a very extensive cleanup at the site by the Army Air Corps, to clean the debris field. And I'm sure...
oh, they wouldn't have noticed, would they?
Next question.
Stan, there's so much controversy about the MJ-12 documents, and where does that rest these days?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. My book, Top Secret Magic, raises all the objections of the noisy negativists and demolishes them. That's what Phil Klass paid me $1,000 for proving them wrong. But there's a whole long list of objections, which I have countered every single one. Let me, just to give you one. generic ranks were used in the list of members. Admiral, not rear admiral. General, not brigadier general. And some guys with strong military backgrounds said that they would never have done that. Well, when you go to the Eisenhower Library, I found that there were memcons, memorandum of conversation, written by General Goodpaster, who was Ike's staff secretary. He would attend the meetings, take notes, list the attendees in the notes that he put out, the conclusions that he put out, and then sign it. Every single officer they used generic ranks for. By generic ranks, times change. You know, if you say general, that covers whether he's a brigadier general, lieutenant general, major general, etc. He calls himself General Goodpaster when he lists the attendees. He signs it Brigadier General Goodpaster. That's typical of the kind of, the guy's, oh, another easy one. Obviously the documents are fraud because they don't have any top secret control number on them. All top secret documents have to have a top secret control number, I was told in loud terms. So I talked to people at the Eisenhower Library and at the Marshall Archives. And the guy at the Marshall Archives said, Stan, we'd still be fighting World War II if all top secret documents had to have control numbers. We have loads of them. Documents without control numbers. And the same with the guy at the Eisenhower Library. Yes, we have many documents. Now, just so you'll understand, there's a reason for that. If you've got to make 20 copies of a top secret document, you have to inventory them. So they have to have a control number, so you know where they are. You always have to be able to do an inventory on your classified documents. And if you leave your safe open, when I was working in that, you'd have to come in at 11 o'clock at night and inventory a whole darn safe if the guards found that it was open. But if you have a memo from General Jones to General Smith, they don't want to go through this central clearinghouse and give it a number. It's a lot of trouble. And bookkeeping, this is pre-computer stuff, pain in the butt. So we're talking standard practices. One person that I felt very strongly about, whom I didn't like, was Donald Menzel, a Harvard University professor, who was a big debunker, wrote 3 anti-UFO books, took every opportunity to say it's nonsense. Make a long story short, I had to get permission from 3 people to go to the Harvard archives, to look at his papers, and discovered, to my total shock, because I didn't like him when he was alive, that as he told John Kennedy, yeah, that one, he has a longer continuous association with the National Security Agency, you've heard of those guys, of anybody in the country more than 30 years as of, this was 1960 when he wrote this memo. When we are properly cleared to each other, this is what he's telling the president, I can tell you more about this. Turned out he learned how to read Japanese. Turned out he was a world-class cryptographer, taught cryptography, code breaking and stuff. In his unpublished autobiography, and I had to get his wife's permission to even look at it, he noted that the worst experience in his life was the hearings that were held trying to take away his Air Force security clearance. He was accused of being, what's a good word, not a spy, but not loyal to the United States. And people like Dr. Vannevar Bush and others stood up for him. There's nothing in the New York Times about those hearings. And all kinds of evidence. I mean, I've got the copies of the letters and the memos, and I got them from Harvard. You have to go there to get them. They're not on the computer. You can't scan somewhere. At least you couldn't when I did. And yet none of the people who objected, how could Menzel lead a double life, ever went there to check on the papers. And if you want to know how somebody can lead a double life, well, Burgess, Philby, and McLean. 3 Brits who were Russian spies for about 15 years Now, when you're working for British intelligence, you got to be careful what you do and what you say, or somebody will find out. Well, how could they know that unless they got it from somebody? 15 years. So, as far as I'm concerned, and I spent more time on this than anybody else, as far as I can tell. My book, Top Secret Magic's back there, and I include some of the letters and Menzel's check and so forth. There are no good arguments against the reality of those three, well, now, I'd say 4 documents. There are over 100 phony documents. You'd expect the government to flood the market with garbage. Good stuff gets out. Well, if we put out garbage that's easily shown to be garbage, then everybody will presume it's all garbage, guilt by association or something like that.
I just wanted to add that, Stan, your 1987 paper and presentation at the American University MUFON conference on the secret life of Donald K. Menzel was not just one of the finest pieces of investigative research I have ever heard. It galvanized me and got me a lot more involved in this work. So I want to take a moment to thank you.
Good. That's what we're trying to do, galvanize. I'm cornering the signal.
I have a question. I know you just finished the book, and I don't know how long it takes you to go from one book to another, but what would be a topic of interest right now and for a new book?
For me or for you?
For you.
Oh, Kathleen and I have talked about doing a new book. We have a number of thoughts. We're not releasing them yet. Writing a book is a lot of work. Some people may not believe that, but you can ask Kathleen. It's an awful lot of work. One area that would be interesting would be something that set up the astronomical and SETI communities for the dumb things they've been saying and the failure of the press to point the finger at it.
I'd read that.
A few years ago, I believe it was a college professor and his students claimed that they hoaxed the whole Lonnie Zamora, Socorro, New Mexico incident. What's your opinion on that?
Yes, I've read that explanation from an outstanding scientist who had it from somebody else, but there had been a hoax. But I've been at the actual location, which is still Nowheresville in Socorro, New Mexico. And J. Allen Hynek talked to people who wasn't that pro-UFO at that time. I can't find any way to buy that explanation. I mean, it sounds good. It must have been a hoax. I can just see some students saying, telling a professor, "Oh, we hoaxed that, Prof," without having to demonstrate how we did it. I mean, there are all kinds of things wrong. Like, how does it move off at very high speed if it was just the balloon that they said it was? They don't move at very high speed, you know. There are a whole bunch of things wrong with the explanation. But naturally, if you use rule number 1, anything but alien, then any explanation that comes along is better than that it's alien. And so it doesn't work when you look at the details. Yeah, I read it with astonishment, as a matter of fact.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Friedman. First, just want to say I'm sorry you had to deal with Philip, no class.
Thank you. Somebody had one of those dirty jobs that somebody had to do.
I was wondering if you could talk about Vannevar Bush, Raytheon, the creation of a nuclear-powered boring machine, and just to finish up, is there anything that is better than that now?
Vannevar Bush, Van Nevar, I'm told, but I never knew him personally, was an outstanding American scientist who, as it turns out, was close to Donald Menzel, which is another story, and was his strongest defender at the loyalty hearings. He was head of basically the research and development community during World War II, under which the atomic bomb was developed and all kinds of other things. And post-war, he was also named head of the Research and Development Board. So if there was one science, he was basically Roosevelt's science advisor, among other things. And he'd been on the board at Harvard, outstanding scientist. And he wasn't right about everything he suggested. I don't know any smart guy who was always right. You've got to make mistakes once in a while to learn from them, you know. But there are all kinds of applications for nuclear energy, which get talked about and most don't come to fruition. I wish more of them would. Some of them are stupid, and I wish they wouldn't. I didn't show you a picture of the nuclear ramjet that we spent a few $100 million on. You see, what was going on, the Cold War was on. And so any company that could come up with an idea that will put us ahead of the Russians, hey, we need support. What's 100 million here, 100 million there, you know. And some of them didn't make any sense. Some did. Once in a while you get people being sensible. For example, to go to the moon, originally it was going to be Earth orbit rendezvous. 2 Saturn V's would have to be launched, which is a big pain in the neck about launch times and weather and all this sort of thing. They'd rendezvous in orbit, and then the combined vehicle would go to the moon. A clever engineer convinced Werner von Braun that if we do our things properly, we can get by with 1 Saturn V, which made an enormous difference in the cost and reliability and all the rest of that. By looking at the numbers, being a good engineer. See, engineers are people who try to figure out how to get things done. The ancient academics are people who try to figure out how things won't work. There's a difference in attitude. Any good engineers out there? I hope. Yeah, good. Now, you guys know what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Interesting, because my question had to do with Dr. Werner von Braun's connection with MJ-12.
There have been all kinds of names put forth as to who might have been a member later on of MJ-12. He wasn't one of the original group, obviously. And people say he was interested in UFOs and all the rest. He was also a Nazi, as you may recall, and got in illegally, basically. I respect this man's engineering talents. Don't
Part of the
misunderstand.
project Paperclip.
Yeah, under Paperclip. But I don't think he was involved with MJ-12. He might have been talked to. I mean, who knows more about our rocketry in New Mexico at that time? And certainly he might have been asked. Remember, we had a big hold over those German scientists. You don't behave properly, you get sent back. And none of them wanted that. I mean, the Russians were there, and the Germans certainly didn't want to be under Russian control. So von Braun might have talked to appropriate people, who knows? I don't know, but I have seen nothing to indicate that he was a member of the team. That doesn't mean he wasn't. Absence of evidence is not evidence for absence. But you see my point.
Yes, sir, I see your point.
Any more questions?
I wasn't sure I should bother with this, but you were talking about uranium that they used in the Hiroshima and all that. I worked on a site that was part of the purification of uranium for that site. And they also had a large mercury release, and I was sort of tangentially involved in getting that cleaned up. Later, I was doing some research on mercury, and I discovered that Oak Ridge National Labs had a 2 million pound release of mercury. And I'm just wondering, yeah, and I'm just wondering if there's any relationship between nuclear
Don't know.
power.
Mercury, there's a chapter in our book, Science Was Wrong, about mercury in Japan and all the children that died from the mercury disease. There's a fancy name for it, which I can't remember. Minimata. So mercury's bad stuff, no question about it. On the other hand, because it's so heavy, it's good for separating ores.
Right. And making them out.
Because it's, well, yeah, it's good for your teeth, but some people say take that all out too. But So I think they were covering their bets, about the best I can say. They had the highest priority. If you wanted something, there was a word that you used on the requisition, and you got it. Which was the only way you could operate at that time, really. With the war effort going on in all directions, you couldn't fight for everything you need. We got to build that darn atomic bomb before the Russians do. And, you know, isn't it an ironic aspect of history? Enrico Fermi, one of the most brilliant scientists who ever lived, because he was good at experiment and theory, both, won a Nobel Prize in 1938. His wife, Laura, was Jewish. Mussolini was starting to clamp down. They were in Italy. So they went to Oslo to get the Nobel Prize, and they went on to the United States, never went back to Italy. Now, if Hitler hadn't acted the way he did toward all the Jewish scientists who wound up being part of the program, legitimate concern. Now, there's another point there, too. Hitler, you spend your money where you think it's going to do you some good. Hitler knew you could build rockets on Braun and Company. And rockets can do damage. It wasn't a theoretical concept. You know, you're working on the V3 and all this sort of stuff. He didn't know you could build an atomic bomb. Nobody knew that you could. So if you got limited resources, and the Germans were being squeezed pretty hard, you put your money where you're more likely to get success in what you're doing right now. So they didn't have the option of spreading their stuff, their funds out as much. In the United States, we had lots of money. That sounds crude to put it that way, but it's true. And you're naturally going to spend your money, some of it on stuff that doesn't work, that won't do well. On the other hand, I have to. There's a picture in my book, Flying Saucers and Science, of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module. You know, it's a big, round, blunt body. Now, everybody knew when I was growing up, if you want a fast vehicle in the atmosphere, you're going to have a pointy nose, sharp wings, highly streamlined like the X-15, right? Wrong. Here you got the Apollo command module. It's a big, round, blunt body. It turns out they did wind tunnel tests at the end of 47 on round, blunt bodies. So somebody, it may very well be that the idea for using that shape for Apollo came from that early work. Because here's the kicker. The thing that makes it most likely that you will succeed in your development project is to know that what you're trying to do can be done. The Russians knew you could make an atomic bomb. We set off, what, 6 of them? So there wasn't any doubt about that. They're as smart as we are. Now, there were many Americans who didn't think so because they didn't go to Ivy League schools, those Russians. You know, give you an example. The man in charge of the Manhattan Project, General Leslie Groves, did one hell of a job. Incidentally, his wife didn't know what he was working on all during the war, and the day of that first bombing on Hiroshima, somebody called, one of the general's officers called Mrs. Groves, saying he thought she would be interested in what would be on the news at noon. So she listened, and we dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, and it made her happy because it meant her son wasn't going to be sent to Japan, as he was scheduled to be. The last sentence of the program was, the program to develop the atomic bomb was under the direction of General Leslie Groves. That's when she found out what he'd been doing. I say that for those people who think, well, everybody tells their wives what they're doing and stuff like that. That's not the case. Another question?
No.
We actually are at the end of our time right now.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Stanton.